Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Lingeshwari. Can you hear me right? Okay. My topic of the day is portal hypertension. So let's move on with the topic. Okay. This is the anatomy of the portal venous system. Okay, the portal system is actually origin from the right and left hepatic vein, and then it forms a portal vein, and then it's dividing into superior, inferior, as well as the splenic
Portal
vein.
hypertension is from the liver vein.
Okay. Okay, the portal hypertension is the resistance to the portal blood flow. It can occur in the pre-hepatic or hepatic, even in the post-hepatic region as well. Okay, when there is a portal hypertension occur, there is a sites of portosystemic collateral circulation in the liver. Because of the liver cirrhosis. So if you see, there are in the presence of the liver cirrhosis, okay, we can see collateral circulation in the stomach, in the bowel, as well as the rectum. Okay. So how do we measure the portal venous system? So the wedge hepatic venous pressure, this wedge hepatic venous pressure is reflect the intra-abdominal pressure minus the free hepatic venous pressure, which reflects the portal venous pressure. Then it gives the hepatic venous pressure gradient. Okay, the normal value for this hepatic venous pressure gradient is less than 5 millimeter mercury. Okay, when there is a portal hypertension, patients usually asymptomatic until the complications develop. Okay, so we go on with the discussion based on the cases and based on the cases. First, we go to the case 1. A 58-year-old painter with history of hepatitis B infection presents with a 3-week history of abdominal swelling. On clinical examination, she has a stigmata of chronic liver disease, palmar erythema, such as palmar erythema, spider nevi, and caput medusa, and shifting dullness in her abdomen as well. Okay, and what are the investigation would you do in this such patient with suspected ascites? Okay, the most common investigation when patient presented to you is you usually do the abdominal tap, right, with the appropriate ascitic fluid analysis. Okay, and subsequently we will do the ultrasound Doppler of the portal vein or ultrasound abdomen, where the radiologist will measure the portal venous pressure. Okay, the routine ascitic fluid investigation we do send is cell count, ascitic fluid albumin, as well as the total protein from the ascitic fluid. The optional investigation you can send is the cultures in the blood culture bottles, glucose, lactate, LDH, amylase, and gram stain. But the most important investigation you should send is a cell count albumin. Okay. And we can send other investigation, but usually it's unusual, and sometimes the pH, lactate, or cholesterol level is unhelpful. So what do we calculate from the ascites fluid? So serum ascites albumin gradient. It means we take the serum albumin minus the ascites fluid albumin. If the gradient is more than 11 gram per liter, then it indicates the portal hypertension. It's 97% accuracy. If the SAAG is less than 11 gram per liter, then the ascites is due to other cause rather than portal hypertension. So how do we treat such patient and how do we manage this patient? Option A, low sodium diet, diuretic with furosemide and spironolactone, therapeutic paracentesis, or all above. The answer is actually all of the above. We should manage this patient with all these things. So first we go to low sodium diet. The dietary sodium restriction should be less than 2000 milligram per day, which is less than 88 millimole per day. And we should restrict the sodium, not the fluid restriction that results in weight loss. And the diuretics, we start spironolactone as well as the furosemide together to maintain the normokalemia. Concomitant treatment with these two diuretics actually is mobilize the moderate ascites faster than sequential treatment. The only indication for the spironolactone monotherapy is where patient has hyperkalemia, or the only setting patient has a profound hypokalemia. Sorry, if patient has the hyperkalemia, we don't initiate the spironolactone monotherapy. Okay. Who needs Herbalitap? Okay. Therapeutic parasynthesis is a initial large volume parasynthesis which rapidly relieve the tense ascites. Okay, the large volume removal with administration of IV human albumin, 8 gram per liter of fluid removed, whether diuretics resistant or not. Okay, removing the fluid from the abdomen does not correct the underlying problem that lead to ascites. So we should find the cause for the ascites. Okay, every liters that we remove from the abdomen, we should substitute with the human albumin 8 gram per liter. Okay, the appropriate treatment for the ascites is single large volume parasynthesis followed by a diet as well as the adequate diuretics. So this is the long-term treatment of liver cirrhosis for this lady. Okay, so we should find the underlying cause and treat the cause, and low sodium diet and vaccination. Hepatitis A vaccination has been recommended for the patients with chronic liver cirrhosis because of the increased morbidity and also mortality associated with the hepatitis A in such patients. So we concurrently treat with the double diuretics, furosemide as well as the spironolactone, lactulose, fluid restriction, and not necessary unless the serum sodium is less than 125 millimole. Okay, the first complications of portal hypertension is ascites. If portal pressure more than 12 millimeter mercury appears to be required for a fluid retention, within 10 years after the diagnosis of compensated cirrhosis, approximately 58% of patients will have developed ascites. After the ascites develop, 15% of the patients will die within 1 year and 44% will die within 5 years. Ascites is the most common complication of the cirrhosis that lead to hospital admission. Okay. And we see how we can adjust the diuretic in patients with ascites. So we go to the case number 2. Mr. A, 56 years old gentleman with a liver cirrhosis from alcoholic liver disease presented to clinic for routine follow-up. He is prescribed with the furosemide 40 milligram with the spironolactone 100 milligram, and he is well with no ascites, no complications. His spot urine sodium is 60 millimole. His spot urine potassium is 12 millimole. So how do we interpret the results? To see the sodium excretion is adequate or not, so we divide the urine sodium with the urine potassium. Okay, if the urine sodium ratio is more than 1, and patient has an adequate urine sodium excretion, so we can continue the current. So what we can do this patient is we continue the current diuretic dose and as well as the sodium restriction. We go to the example of second case of the 56 years old gentleman with the liver cirrhosis from alcoholic liver disease presented with 4th episode of tense ascites. That means he already has the recurrent of ascites. He was prescribed with the Lasix 80 milligram OD and spironolactone 200 OD. And his spot urine sodium is 45, which is slightly higher, and spot urine potassium is 34. And how do we interpret these results? And urine sodium is actually more than the ratio of urine sodium over potassium is more than 1. That means he's taking more sodium in daily diets. So what we do next is we should restrict the sodium in his diet. We continue the diuretics. Same patient 1 month later came back with 5th episode of 10 ascites. So now we look at his urine sodium is 25, which is lesser. That means already patient restricted his sodium intake. Urine spot potassium is 34. And if you look at the ratio of urine sodium over potassium is less than 1. So the cause could be the inadequate diuresis or patient is non-compliance. Let's say this patient is compliance to the diuretics. So what we can do is we can increase further both the diuretics, spironolactone as well as the furosemide. Okay, if the same patient is compliant to the diuretic as well as the salt restriction, and he already on the maximum dose of spironolactone as well as the Lasix, and he still present with the recurrent ascites, what we can do this patient? Okay, whether to increase the diuretic or we ask patient to restrict fluid, or we do nothing, bed rest, or we treat this patient as a refractory ascites. So the answer is E. We treat this patient as a refractory ascites. It means a fluid overload, which is unresponsive to sodium restricted diet, and high dose diuretic treatment, which is 400 milligram per day of spironolactone and 160 milligram per day of furosemide. It recurs rapidly after therapeutic parasynthesis. So what is failure of diuretic therapy? It's a minimal to no weight loss with the inadequate urinary sodium excretion despite the diuretics. The development of diuretic related complications such as progressive azotemia, hepatic NCAF, or progressive electrolyte imbalance, and with the absence of NSAIDs intake. Less than 10% of the patients are refractory to the standard medical therapy. But survival in these patients with diuretic resistant ascites is 50% at the 6 months and 25% at 1 year. So how do we manage the refractory ascites? First, we withhold the beta blocker, and we can do the serial therapeutic parasynthesis, tips transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic stent, proceed with the liver transplantation and peritoneal venous shunt. So we go on with the serial therapeutic parasynthesis or large volume parasynthesis. Okay. The mainstay of treatment in diuretic this is the mainstay of the treatment in diuretic resistant ascites, which we remove as much as fluid as possible. More than 5 liters are considered large volume parasynthesis. So, albumin replacement in this group of patients, we infuse during or shortly after the parasynthesis. The dose of albumin is 6 to 8 grams per liter of fluid that we remove, and may not be necessary in single parasynthesis of less than 5 liters. Okay, if we look at this albumin, actually we have 2 strength available, which is 5% human albumin and 25%, and both are 12.5 gram. But as a replacement, we use 25% human albumin. Okay. In rough estimation, every 2 liters we give 1 vial, because 1 vial contains 12.5 gram. So about a liter we give about 6 gram. For 2 liters we can give 12.5 gram. TIPS is a transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic stent shunt, which is done by the interventional radiologists, where they do the side-to-side portocaval shunt. Creation of a low resistant channel between the hepatic vein and the intrahepatic portion of the portal vein using the angiographic. Okay. So they insert the guide wire and also the balloon catheter. So from the hepatic vein to the portal vein. Okay. So there are absolute and also relative contraindication for the tips as well. So absolute includes heart failure with severe TR, severe pulmonary hypertension with multiple hepatic Cs, uncontrolled systemic infection, and also unrelieved biliary obstruction. The relative contraindication is this one. Okay, we go to the next case. Mr. A patient with cirrhosis and ascites. Now he develops low-grade fever and abdominal pain and distension. His medications are propranolol and diuretics. Parasynthesis performed and reveals total polymorph 550 and culture yields E. coli. What could be the diagnosis? I think I already pressed it. SBP. Okay. So second complication of portal hypertension is spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. SBP is a ascitic fluid infection without an evident intra or abdominal surgically treatable source. Signs and symptoms of SBP is fever, abdominal pain, altered mental status, diarrhea, hypotension, paralytic ileus, and sometimes patients will be asymptomatic as well. Okay. And it's important to recognize the SBP as early in the course of infection because a very short window of opportunity during which to intervene to ensure a good outcome. It's estimated the survival decreased by approximately 8% for each hour of delay in starting the antibiotic in patient with a septic shock. So the duration of hypotension before the initiation of the effective antimicrobial therapy is critical determinant of a survival in human septic shock. So what are the 3 important management of SBP when patient presented to you? Number 1 is empirical antibiotic therapy. We should start as soon as possible. And number 2 is IV human albumin, 1.5 gram per kg at the time of diagnosis and 1 gram per kg on day 3. And stop the diuretic as well as the propranolol. Okay, we can initiate the antibiotics after the parasynthesis performed. Okay, because a single dose of broad spectrum antibiotics actually can lead to no growth in 80% of patients after 6 hours. So the preferred antibiotic is the 3rd generation cephalosporin, IV cefotaxime 2 gram 8 hourly or IV ceftriaxone 2 gram OD. The common bacteria we can yield is the E. coli, streptococcal species and Klebsiella pneumonia. So mostly it's a gram-negative organism. Okay, so IV human albumin, the initiation will be 1.5 gram per kg within 6 hours of diagnosis, followed by 1 gram per kg, as I mentioned earlier. And it has been reported to decrease the mortality from 29% to 10% when used with appropriate antibiotics versus antibiotics and no albumin. Okay. The ability of albumin to improve the intravascular volume and bind inflammatory cytokines had led to the study of albumin therapy in patients with SBP. So albumin in combination with antibiotics prevents a renal impairment and reduce the mortality in the SBP as well. Okay. So we discussed a bit on propranolol. It's a non-selective beta blocker. And beta blockers are part of the cornerstone of the medical management of the cirrhosis as well, particularly in the primary and secondary prevention of pericial hemorrhage. There is new evidence cautions using this beta blocker in patients with end-stage liver cirrhosis. So it should be tapered and discontinued when patients develop end-stage cirrhosis, liver cirrhosis with refractory ascites, as it's decreased the cardiac output, results in decrease in renal perfusion, asthenia, and increase the risk of hepatorenal syndrome as well as the mortality. Okay. So we go to the next case. Madam B, who is 58 years old patient with liver cirrhosis, presented to the ED 3 days prior to her scheduled gastroscopy. She complained of passing melanic stool. Her HP is 9 gram per deciliter, platelet is 120. What possible diagnosis? Okay. So the third complications of portal hypertension is variceal bleed. Okay. So what is the management of variceal upper GI bleeding? Of course, we refer surgical, but then as a medical side, we can manage the patient before the surgical take over the patient. So basically our part is for the hemodynamic stabilization of the patient. So we do the resuscitation, and then we try to prevent and treatment of complications as well. And the treatment of bleeding is solely done by the surgical, by the scope. If gastro unit available in the hospital, then the case will be handled by the gastro unit. Okay, so patient should be referred to urgent an endoscopy, and then should initiate the prophylactic antibiotic therapy. The initiation of the pharmacological agent like terlipressin, octreotide, or somatostatin for at least for 3 to 5 days, and we should off the propranolol, and transfusion if HP is less than 8, but then it's difficult to estimate the HP when patient having overt bleeding. If patient is clinically unstable or hemodynamically unstable or pale, we initiate the transfusion without waiting for the FDC. Okay, endoscopic is diagnostic and also for the therapeutic as well. Endoscopic therapy is the definitive treatment for the choice of active variceal hemorrhage. Okay, when you look at the first picture, it's a small straight variceal. It's 2, and picture number 2 is enlarged tortuous varices that occupy less than 1/3 of the lumen. It's 2, and these 3 almost actually about 80% actually occupy the large coil-shaped varices. Okay, endoscopic variceal ligation, and also actually 2 types of endoscopic therapy: endoscopic variceal ligation as well as endoscopic variceal sclerotherapy. And antibiotic therapy in variceal bleed in cirrhotic patient with upper GI bleed, they have a high risk of developing the bacterial infection, especially spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. So early recurrence of variceal bleeding, it actually has a greater risk of mortality as well. So no harm, initiate the short-term antibiotic prophylaxis. Okay, the recommended antibiotic is oral norfloxacin 400 mg BD, and it's a selective eradication of the gram-negative bacteria in the gut, or can start the ciprofloxacin, and the most effective antibiotic is ceftriaxone 1 gram a day for 7 days. Okay, little bit on the vasopressin. It's a potent splanchnic vasoconstrictor. It reduces the portal blood flow and decreases the portal pressure, but then the clinical usage of this vasopressin is limited because it has extrasplenic vasoconstrictive properties, where it can have a cardiac or peripheral ischemia, arrhythmias, hypertension, as well as the bowel ischemia. So, so the efficacy and safety improved by adding the nitrates. Okay, we can start with 0.2 to 0.4 unit per minute to maximum 0.8 unit per minute with the IV nitroglycerin. Terlipressin is the most common synthetic analog that we use for acute variceal bleeding. It has a longer biological activity and significantly has a fewer side effect, and effective in controlling acute variceal bleed as well, and it has proven to have a decrease in mortality. And initial dose is 2 mg IV every 4 hours, then titrate down to 1 mg IV every 4 hours once bleeding has been controlled. Okay. Blood transfusion, close monitoring should to avoid the over-transfusion with volume overload. Okay. If we over-transfuse, there is a risk of rebound, portal hypertension, and induction of rebleeding. So we have to be very cautious on blood transfusion. Okay, we should maintain HP 8. It's based on the experimental studies. Restitution of the all blood loss leads to increase in portal pressure to levels higher than baseline and to more rebleeding and increased mortality as well. Okay. Despite the endoscopic and pharmacological therapy, if the bleeding recurs, what is the subsequent management? What we do? Of course, we have some rescue therapies as well. Actually, all these handled by the surgical, but then I think it's no harm. We have some knowledge on it. Yes, rescue therapy. Second, Blackmore tube insertion, and we can refer for the tips insertion or shunt surgery as well. Okay, so Sangstecken Blackmore tube, actually it's a balloon tamponade, which is effective way to achieve short-term hemostasis, a temporary measure due to complications and rebleeding upon balloon deflation. And common complications are aspiration, asphyxiation, esophageal perforation or rupture, pain, or pharyngeal or gastroesophageal erosion or ulcers caused by the local pressures. Okay, if you look at this is the gastric suction part, gastric balloon, and esophageal balloon. So we inflate the gastric balloon prior to esophageal balloon. Okay, so insert through the nose. Okay. Tips is insertion is indicates if the hemorrhage from the bleeding varices cannot be controlled or in whom bleeding recurs despite the combined endoscopic and also pharmacological therapy. It's a salvage therapy, and for the poor surgical candidates. Early tips can lead to good outcomes in selected patients when performed by the experienced radiologists in institutions where the tips is available in the center. Okay. These are the complications of the tips. And if it's and another option is a shunt surgery. Okay, natural history of esophageal varices. If when there is an increase in portal pressure more than 10 millimeter mercury, then there will be a formation of varices, and then the dilatation of the varices. If left untreated, the varices will be ruptured if the hepatic venous pressure gradient more than 12 millimeter mercury. Okay, if left untreated, risk of rebleeding is there and high risk of mortality. Okay, what is the long-term plan for Madam B? Okay. A patient who survived an episode of acute variceal bleed, very high risk of rebleeding and also death. So median rebleeding time in untreated individual is around 60% within 1 to 2 years of index hemorrhage with 33% of mortality. Patients who have recovered from acute episode of variceal hemorrhage and have no evidence of bleeding for at least 24 hours, we started on therapy to prevent recurrence prior to discharge from the hospital. Okay. So, non-selective beta blocker propranolol is lower the portal pressure and reduce the risk of first bleeding in patients with esophageal varices, and it's a treatment of choice for primary prophylaxis. In a high-risk patient, those have a variceal bleed, and generally the dose will be titrated to achieve 25% decrease in resting heart rate. Okay? And propranolol also decrease the recurrence of bleeding. 35% versus 62% at 1 year from portal hypertensive gastropathy. Okay. So before we discharge patient with a variceal bleed, we should make sure patient, if there is no contraindication, we should make sure patient discharged with propranolol. And endoscopic therapy, it's also method of choice of prevent the rebleed. So median rebleeding rate in patient treated with the EVL is around 32%. So usually repeat the EVL in 1 to 2 weeks interval until the variceal obliteration. Once eradicated, can repeat the scope every 3 to 6 months to re-evaluate for the recurrence. Okay. So combination therapy is EVL and also pharmacological is a rational approach. Theoretically, beta blocker will protect against the rebleeding prior to variceal obliteration and prevent the recurrence. And meta-analysis also suggests that combination endoscopic and also the drug therapies prevent the variceal bleeding in cirrhotic patient. And it's reduced overall rebleeding and also variceal recurrence in cirrhosis patient, either therapy alone. So during the weekend round, Madam's B son complained that the patient has sleeping more during the daytime and she is slow in response. What could be the diagnosis? So the third complication of portal hypertension is hepatic encephalopathy, and it's after exclusion of other causes of brain dysfunction. So what is your next step of management? Hepatic NCAF is a spectrum of potentially reversible neuropsychiatric abnormalities seen in patients with liver dysfunction and portosystemic shunting. Okay, this is taken from the up-to-date. There are 4 grades: grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and asterexia is present grade 2 and after. And grade 1 usually they will have euphoria, depression, confusion, slurred speech, and disordered sleep as well. And grade 2, they look more lethargic and more confused. Grade 3, they will have a marked confusion with incoherent speech and sleeping, but they will arousable. And grade 4 is coma. And EEG in grade 1 usually normal, but subsequent 2, 3, 4 will have an abnormal EEG finding. Okay. The management of hepatic NCAF is we should screen for the precipitating cause. Okay. First, history again. Ask what are the medications patient on, and see whether there is an increased ammonium production or absorption or entry into the brain. Okay, the common cause is a constipation, so or the excessive dietary protein intake. Okay, or we should find out other cause as well, like infection, GI bleed, and dehydration, and we treat the underlying cause. Generally, supportive care, and we should provide the appropriate nutritional support to the patient, refer the dietitian, and then get a protein calculated diet for the patient, and avoid dehydration as well as correct all the electrolyte abnormalities. And precautions to prevent the fall should be instituted for the patient who are disoriented, and judicious use of restraint, which may be safer option than pharmacological treatment in patients who are agitated. Okay, so maintain the energy intake 35 to 40 kilocal per kg per day, with the protein intake about 1.2 to 1.5 gram per kg per day. We can get our dietitian to calculate for the patient. And patients with cirrhosis are often malnourished, and protein shouldn't restrict too much of proteins, and restriction of proteins are associated with the increased mortality. So patients with hepatic NCAF should generally not to have their protein intake restricted too much as well. Okay. Management is to identify the cause and then correct the precipitating factor, and measures should be taken to lower the blood ammonium concentration as well. So medication, we can use the synthetic disaccharide lactulose, and rifaximin is effective add-on therapy to lactulose for preventing the recurrence of hepatic NCAF. Correct the hypokalemia. Okay, we can give lactulose up to 45 ml 2 to 4 times a day, and the dose should be titrated to achieve at least 2 to 3 soft tools per day. Okay. GI tract is the primary source of ammonium, so which enters the circulation via the portal vein. So make sure patient BO at least 3 times a day. So next, Madam's B renal function then deteriorated. She is but she's hemodynamically stable and she's not on any diuretics. What could be the next complication occur? The hepatorenal syndrome. So how do we treat? So hepatorenal syndrome is a diagnosis of exclusion. The major criteria to diagnose the hepatorenal syndrome in the setting of cirrhosis is cirrhosis with ascites, serum creatinine more than 133 per liter, no improvement of creatinine after 2 days of withdrawing the diuretics, absence of shock, no current or recent treatment with nephrotoxic drug, absence of parenchyma disease such as no proteinuria or hematuria or normal ultrasound KUB. If all this excluded, then we can come to the diagnosis of hepatorenal syndrome. There are two types, 1 and 2. Type 1 is more serious compared to the type 2. And type 1 is more rapid, at least 2-fold increase in creatinine, a level greater than 221 micromole per liter during a period of less than 2 weeks time. So management is medical therapy should be instituted in the attempt to reverse the acute kidney injury associated with hepatorenal syndrome. Actually, we should have a best hope for the reversal of the renal failure is an improvement in the hepatic function due to partial resolution of the primary disease or to successful liver transplantation. If transplantation service is available, then we can refer for liver transplantation. So ill patients require the ICU care, and often they need a inotropic norepinephrine support as well as the albumin infusion. Norepinephrine is given intravenously as a continuous infusion 0.5 to 3 milligram per hour with the goal of raising the MAP by 10 millimeter mercury. Albumin at least we should give for 2 days as an IV bolus, 1 gram per kg per day, 100 gram maximum in a day. So IV vasopressin may also be effective. Okay. So without the therapy, most of the hepatorenal syndrome patients will die within weeks of the onset of the renal impairment. Okay. If medical therapy fail, can go for TIPS or dialysis. Okay. Can hepatorenal syndrome prevented? Yes. In patient with SVP, administration of the intravenous albumin 1.5 gram per 1.5 gram per kg at the time of diagnosis of infection, and another dose of albumin on day 3, 1 gram per kg is of antibiotic treatment. It can prevent the hepatorenal syndrome in the future. Okay, selected patients with the cirrhosis and ascites, we recommend chronic norfloxacin therapy as well. Okay, now Madam B has been discharged. She got no more upper GI bleed. Her renal function has been improved without any dialysis, and she discharged home well. That's it. Thank you.